Two men walked into the rainforest. Moments before, the forest had been alive with the sounds of squawking birds and howling monkeys. Now all was quiet, as the creatures watched the two men and wondered why they had come. The larger man stopped and pointed to a great kapok tree. Then he left. Look at the picture, girls, and first thing I want you to notice is not just the creatures which you might see hovering above or slithering from above, but also I'd like you to look at the size of the man compared with, well, that's just the roots of the tree I can see below, and I can see the trunk of the tree heading skyward, not even seen any of its branches yet. So that's one thing to notice. And the other thing I'd like to point out is how the author has finished her paragraph. The larger man stopped and pointed to a great kapok tree. Then he left. She has deliberately finished with a short sentence for dramatic effect. Authors often do that if they want to hook us or capture our attention and make us wonder what is going to happen next. The smaller man took the axe he carried and struck the trunk of the tree. Whack! 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 The sounds of the blows rang through the forest. The wood of the tree was very hard. Chop! 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 The man wiped off the sweat that ran down his face and neck. Whack! Chop! Whack! Chop! Soon the man grew tired. He sat down to rest at the foot of the great kapok tree. Before he knew it, the heat and hum of the forest had lulled him to sleep. I'd like you girls to look at the very top line and see if you can notice a spelling which looks a bit peculiar. The American word for axe doesn't have an E. I wonder if you noticed that. Look at the pictures. Can you see the snake still on the tree trunk? What other creatures can you see? There's lots and lots of flora, plant life, but also there's lots of fauna. Some of the fauna, some of the animals, are camouflaged. I'm looking at the bottom of the page, and I can see something that's green sitting on a very, very large leaf. I'm also looking at the top of the screen, and I think I can see something hanging around in the distance as well. Now let's look at the text. There are some really good words here. Whack, whack, whack. There's a particular name for words like that, words that sound like the thing which they're describing. Sarah, I reckon you know, because I know you talked about it recently in your reading journal, I think. It's onomatopoeia, and the other example there is chop, chop, chop. Whack, chop. So these words sound like the sound effect which we're trying to describe. A boa constrictor lived in the kapok tree. He slithered down its trunk to where the man was sleeping. He looked at the gash the axe had made in the tree. Then the huge snake slid very close to the man and hissed in his ear. "Señor, this tree is a tree of miracles. It is my home, where generations of my ancestors have lived. Do not chop it down." A boa constrictor, girls, is, for me, quite a scary idea of a snake. And if you don't know how a boa constrictor kills its prey, then that's something to think about. I believe that they squash them to death to squeeze all the air out of you. So I'm not sure what's going to happen to that man in a minute. The author has also chosen a very, very dramatic word to describe the crack or hole which the axe has made in the tree. He's used the word, she has used the word gash. And a gash is a very, very deep injury. When you cut your finger on a piece of paper, you just have a bit of a nick in your skin. But a gash is something that you would have to go to hospital for. So what the author's trying to tell us here is basically this man has injured the tree. He has done this tree serious harm. She has very deliberately chosen that word. Wow, how many different species of butterfly or possibly moth can you see in this picture? I'm having a look myself. I'm going to count. I think there's certainly more than a dozen. Girls, quite apart from the picture here, I'd like to draw your attention to the importance of these creatures. Butterflies, insects, birds even, and sometimes mammals all play a very, very important part in the life cycle of plants because they help to spread pollen from one plant to another. Now, pollen is something which I think you might have learnt about in Year 3 very briefly. That is the special chemical which is found mostly in the flowers of plants and which, when it is transferred to another plant, sometimes by an insect that's been visiting or by an animal that brushes past it, when the pollen is transferred to the flower of another plant, it fertilizes the eggs of that plant and creates seeds. So pollinators, animals, insects, birds that spread pollen are a really, really important part of the ecosystem, not just of the Amazon rainforest, but also of our own ecosystems which we have here in the United Kingdom. A bee buzzed in the sleeping man's ear. "Senor, my hive is in this kapok tree, and I fly from tree to tree and flower to flower, collecting pollen. In this way, I pollinate the trees and flowers throughout the rainforest. You see, all living things depend on one another." I think the author has been very clever in her writing here. A bee buzzed. Tree to tree. Flower to flower. There's a particular name which authors use for this technique where the first letter of a word is repeated, like bee buzzed and flower to flower. I wonder if you know what it's called. It's called alliteration. A troop of monkeys scampered down from the canopy of the kapok tree. They chattered to the sleeping man. "Senor, we have seen the ways of man. You chop down one tree, then you come back for another and another. The roots of these great trees will be withering and dying, and there will be nothing left to hold the earth in place. When the heavy rains come, the soil will be washed away, and the forest will become a desert." Lynne is talking about a very serious problem that happens when trees are removed from forests. Not just in the Amazon rainforest, but anywhere really. It can happen in our country too. The roots of any tree, girls, are there to anchor the tree, to keep it upright, and to pull up water and other nutrients from the soil to feed the tree. Roots also help to hold the soil together. And that's very, very important, especially where you have a climate which, as in the rainforest, is susceptible sometimes to huge downpours of rain. And of course, if you take away trees and you take away the tree roots, one of the effects is going to be that the soil, which sustains a lot of the other life, is going to be washed away into the nearest river. She also talks here about a troop of monkeys, and that's a very interesting word that I want you to look at. Look at the spelling of it. Troop is a collective noun. It's a special noun for describing a group of objects or beings, just like we talk about a herd of sheep, or we might talk about a flock of geese. The word for a group of monkeys is a troop of monkeys. She's also chosen a very good verb here as well to describe how they move down from the canopy. I think scamper is a perfect word to choose when you're trying to describe how a monkey moves about. A toucan, a macaw, and a cock of the rock flew down from the canopy. "Senor," squawked the toucan, "you must not cut down this tree. We have flown over the rainforest and seen what happens once you begin to chop down the trees. Many people settle on the land. They set fires to clear the underbrush, and soon the forest disappears. Where once there was life and beauty, only black and smouldering ruins remain." Lynne is talking about a huge problem that faces the Amazon rainforest when humans clear the land. They clear the land of its flora, meaning its trees and all its other plants. That means that the fauna, the animals, have nowhere to live or die because their environment has been damaged. They do this in order to create space for meadows on which to grow grass and graze cattle to produce beef, often to send to Europe for us to eat. Or they do it in order to clear space for agricultural farming, for growing crops, again to produce fruit or vegetables or cereals to export to other countries outside of South America. The methods by which the rainforests are cleared are often very, very violent, and that can, as Lynne tells us in this book, include burning down the forests. The more observant of you girls will notice that not only are there lots of frogs in this picture, I'll let you count for yourselves, but also that there are many different species, different types of frog, some small, some slightly larger, and all with different coloured markings, which means that they are completely different species. A bright and small tree frog crawled along the edge of a leaf. In a squeaky voice, he piped into the man's ear. "Signor, a ruined rainforest means ruined lives. Many ruined lives. You would leave many of us homeless if you chop down this great Kapok tree." Ooh, it looks like the sleeping man has a visitor. Now, is that visitor herbivore, carnivore, or omnivore? A jaguar had been sleeping along a branch in the middle of the tree. Because his spotted coat blended into the dappled light and shadows of the understory, no one had noticed him. Now he leapt down and padded silently over to the sleeping man. He growled in his ear, "Senor, the Kapok tree is home to many birds and animals. If you cut it down, where will I find my dinner?" 4 tree porcupines swung down from branch to branch and whispered to the man, "Senor, do you know what we animals and humans need in order to live? Oxygen. And, senor, do you know what trees produce? Oxygen. If you cut down the forests, you will destroy that which gives us all life." Lynne touches on a very, very important aspect of not just the rainforest, but again, all rainforests, and in fact, all forests and all plants. All plants that live on our earth produce oxygen. They take in that gas called CO2, which we breathe out. They take that in through their leaves, and they produce oxygen and push it back out into our atmosphere, which is why it's so important for us to plant trees in our gardens and to replace trees which are chopped down when we build buildings. People often say that the Amazon rainforest are the lungs of our Earth, because the forests are so huge. They produce not just oxygen for South America, but they produce oxygen for huge parts of the world. Several anteaters climbed down the kapok tree with their young clinging to their backs. The unstriped anteater said to the sleeping man, "Senor, you are chopping down this tree with no thought for the future, and surely you know that what happens tomorrow depends on what you do today. The big man tells you to chop down a beautiful tree. He does not think of his own children, who tomorrow must live in a world without trees." Again, Lynne is drawing our attention to the environmental impact of destroying natural habitats, because we're not just affecting our future, we're affecting the future of our children and possibly even our grandchildren as well. When I first read this book, girls, I learnt something new on every page, and on this particular page I learnt how many toes a sloth has. I never knew before I read The Great Kapok Tree. A 3-toed sloth had begun climbing down from the canopy when the men first appeared. Only now did she reach the ground. Plodding ever so slowly over to the sleeping man, she spoke in her deep and lazy voice. "Senor, how much is beauty worth? Can you live without it? If you destroy the beauty of the rainforest, on what would you feast your eyes?"